Welcome to part two of this demonstration video. This is following on from the previous video, which was to do with the auto number and to register plugin steps programmatically. So in the previous episode, we created a auto number entity. Let me just find it. It's under our settings at the very end. Created this auto number entity, which enables the users or power users to create one or more auto numbers against any entity in the system. So they simply specify the logical name, the target field on the entity, and then an optional prefix and suffix. And then there's a editable counter, which can be padded to a certain number of characters that you can define. Again, the padding length wasn't required, so they could not specify, and they would just simply get a concatenated version of the prefix, counter, and suffix. So in the previous video, we covered the creation of that plugin to do that logic and increment the counter. I did have a thought that possibly we could have introduced an increment field as well, but something you can play around with yourselves in your own time. So you could specify the increment was in increments of 10, and it would obviously add that increment, or even negatives if you wanted it to go backwards, and you could add that increment on and your counter would go in that direction by that amount. So in this next video, we're going to write a plugin that will be registered against the auto number entity that will, when one of these records is created or deleted, will either add a message processing step if one doesn't already exist against that entity, or if you delete a row and it's the last remaining row targeting that entity, will remove the message processing step. So if I now go across to our Visual Studio, this is I've opened my solution from yesterday, and so I'm in Visual Studio. I've opened this solution from the previous video, which contained this was using the developer toolkit, contained our plugins project with an auto number plugin that we created previously. So now we're going to create a new plugin for the auto registration of the steps. We'll create this against, obviously, the auto number entity. If I right click on it, and so within my CRM Explorer, obviously if you can't see it, view CRM Explorer, I've got mine auto hidden to the side. If I pop that out, expand CRM demo and expand entities, I can right click on my auto number entity and create plugin. It brings up the same dialog we saw before. So it's targeting the plugin project. The primary entity will be the auto number. The message we're going to create first will be the create. We'll use the same plugin logic for both messages, but put different methods in so that it'll handle the create message with one block of code or one method, and the delete message with another method, basically. Okay, so in the context of the calling user, and then we'll do this post operation. Doesn't really matter which we do because we're not manipulating the auto number record itself. We're going off and manipulating message processing steps, registrations of those. So it doesn't really matter whether this has actually been committed to the database or not, but for this purpose, we'll do post operation. Obviously on the delete, when we get to that, we'll need to probably do a post image so that we can get details about the record before it was actually deleted from the database, because otherwise all we'll have is a entity reference of what's been deleted already, and there won't be any way of querying it because it's already gone from the database. So we need to give it a suitable name. So we'll call this auto step registration or something like that. Just something so you know what it's called. And then we can give it a suitable description. I'm hoping my keyboard isn't too loud today. I did notice on the video previously, I say I haven't got a boom arm yet for this microphone, so it picks up mouse clicks and keyboard presses really loud through my desk, unfortunately, so apologies for that. So auto step registration plugin. and on the create we won't need a post image alias because it'll be the auto number record will have been committed to the database. We'll have the details, all the values that were passed in as part of the create. So if I OK that, that's now created our new auto step registration plugin, inheriting again from the base class. And then we can start to put our business logic in against this underneath the to do rather. So I can probably copy the initial part of it from my previous plugin. So where I create these shorter variable names, basically, we can do the same. Likewise, the input parameters, checking for the presence of the target object and the type is entity. So I'll copy those in, paste those. So next we need to start to reference the SDK message processing step. It's an entity like any other, that there is a helper class within the SDK that we can add that adds some additional types. So if I right click my plugins and add existing item, if I go into my CRM 2015 SDK, into the SDK folder, sample code CS for C#, and then there's a helper code folder. So SDK folder, sample code C#, helper code. There's this my organization CRM SDK types. And if I shrink the window so you can see, if I add that in, so it's now added as a class library, that will add some additional types into my plugin, one of which is the SDK message processing step, which has got a number of properties that we're going to need to set, plugin IDs and message IDs and so on. And this just makes it a little bit easier and sort of self-contained without you having, because there's no real documentation on this on the internet and in the SDK documentation. So equals new SDK message processing step, and then we can start to initialize it. Control, and then you can see it's got these various properties, event handlers and so on, that we're going to need to define a few of these values and retrieve some of them possibly from CRM and write a couple of extra methods to do so. So for things like the plugin type ID and so on, unless we want to go and get the GUIDs and stuff from our register file or something, if we want it to be a bit more dynamic, that it can handle it via the name of the plugin, because we'll know the name. So things like SDK message ID and so on, we'll need to probably retrieve these from CRM. So first we'll add a bit of logic to check for our context.message name. So if our message name, so our auto number plugin is registered on, going to be on a create and a delete, and obviously if you want to extend it and do it on an update, you're welcome to, but that may be a little bit more involved because you'll be needing to modify existing steps and so on. You shouldn't have to. It's only if they were to change entity and so on within the auto number record. But to be honest, you're probably better off locking down the form, apart from a couple of fields, maybe like the suffix and prefix, things like the entity name and field name on auto number. You're probably better off locking down once the record's been created, so they can't go and change those. And then if they need to, they'll have to delete it and recreate a new version. And possibly introduce duplicate detection rules to prevent more than one auto number rule on the same entity against the same field name. Those two fields make it unique. So I'm going to put in a check now to see if this auto number has been registered on a create. What I'll probably do is do a to-upper, saves any chance of case issue with your message. So as long as it's converted to upper, we know that's always going to be, we don't have to worry about the initial letter being uppercase or lowercase. So if it's create, we'll do this block of code, and maybe if the message name to upper equals delete. So if they delete a auto number record, we can do another block of code. Scroll down so you can see that a bit better. Okay, so for our create block, I'll just cut this and paste it in here. We need to start to declare a new, I missed the semicolon. We need to start to declare a new SDK message processing step record, which has got, say, numerous properties that we need to define. So one of which is the mode, and this is an option set value, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. So what we can do is probably create a series of enums to define the various properties so that we don't have to remember the exact values. So we can either do that up at the top of this class, or I'll just do, so if I do an enum, call it CRM plugin, or even plugin mode. That's got two values. We've got asynchronous, or synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous, and that equals 0. Asynchronous equals 1. Then we can specify that and do a new option set value. CRM plugin mode dot, and obviously we want this to be synchronous. Will need to cast that as an int. So obviously, because the option set value expects it, the parameter expects is of type integer, and an enum won't return a type as such. You have to cast it to get the value from it. So that's the mode. There's a name which is, we hover over it, it's the name of the processing step, so we can call this pretty much what we like. So I don't know, say create of entity auto number plugin step. It's not crucial. I think we do require the name, but we can put really whatever we like there. So then we can do the rank of the execution order. So we're just going to set this to 1. It'll be the only auto number registered against that entity, so it shouldn't really particularly matter on the order of the create, whether it's the first of the create plugins that gets triggered or not, because this is just going to manipulate a single reference within it, which is the target field of the auto number. So next we can do the plugin stage, which is expecting again an option set value. So we can set up another enum down here for CRM, or just got it plugin stage. It's fairly self-explanatory. Let me just scroll down a bit. So we've got our pre-validation, which is stage 10, pre-operation, which is stage 20, and post-operation, which is stage 40. So because we want to, as we saw in our previous video, where we registered the Autonumber plugin pre-operation so that we don't have to do subsequent updates and trappings for context.depth, we can just modify the property. So we're going to set it pre-operation, so as will be plugin can't remember what I called it now. Plugin. Sorry, that should be plugin stage, not plugin state. Plugin stage dot pre-operation. Sorry, that should be an option set value. option set value, cast that to an int again. Sorry about that. So next we'll do the supported deployment. Again, another option set. This is to say whether it's server client or both. So we'll need an additional enum again. So we can do an enum down here, which is deployment mode or something. Deployment mode. So we've got server only, 0, offline, or both. We don't have to specify number, but obviously for clarity, I guess it pays to put the numbers in. So that's the deployment mode. So we can say new option set value, int cast, and then deployment mode. And we're going to do server only. So now we need to start specifying things like the event handler, which is which plugin we're going to, basically the GUID of the plugin that's going to handle this message processing step. So we're going to need to query the plugin type entity for the name of our plugin, our auto number plugin, to return the GUID. So again, we can do a function, which will just be a fairly simple query expression and query just to retrieve the single plugin that matches the name of our assembly, our plugin name. So if I go down beneath my execute and within the same class library, I can do an internal returns a GUID get plugin ID or something like that. So we can pass in the iOrganization service by reference and a string for the plugin name that we wish to search for. Okay, so this will be a query expression, but if I start to type query expression, you'll see it doesn't understand the type. So we need an additional reference up here for the .query namespace, or I can probably, if I've typed incorrectly, use a resolve and it will add in. So if I right click using, it's added in the SDK query namespace. So query equals new query expression. We can initialize, the constructor takes a parameter, so we can specify the entity name, which is plugin type, and then we can initialize a couple of properties, things like the column set equals new column set, and that can either be a true for all columns or a new string array. We'll just get the name, and obviously it will return the ID. Next, we can specify the criteria equals a new filter expression. Just scroll down a bit. So now we can specify the criteria for the add a condition for the query expression. So a new condition expression. Oops, excuse me. And that's again got an overloading method whereby we can specify the name and so on. So what I'm going to quickly just change is I will just return all of the columns because we're only going to get a single result for this particular plugin type, and then we can filter the condition expression can be the name of the plugin equals and then our plugin name, so we can get our plugin name from our register file. So up here, this is the name of the plugin we're going to add the additional step for. That's our auto number, CRM 2015 demo myinstance.plugins.auto number. And that's what we can specify within the code here. So it's going to go off and query the plugin type entity where the name of the plugin equals this. And then we'll give us we can do a standard service dot retrieve multiple for this query. Obviously the return type of this is an entity collection, so we can declare that entity collection results equals collection. Then we need to obviously check that we've got at least one, we need to get a single result, otherwise we can't return the plugin ID. Obviously, if we get more than one for this plugin, I don't know if that's even possible to have the same plugin name registered. I doubt it is. So yeah, we should get a single result. So we need to check if results.any, or sorry, results.entities.any. The IntelliSense is going to complain now because any is a link extension method. So I need to come up here and add in an additional using for system.link. So that's just going to wherever it's gone. If there are any results, then we can just go to the first entity and return the ID. So return results.entities.first.id. So that'll give us the GUID of the plugin called this name, and then else we'll just have to return a GUID.empty or something. So because it's got a return type of GUID, we need to return something. So if there aren't any results, obviously we need an else to complete otherwise it's an invalid method because it doesn't always have a return type. So then up at our create, when we're declaring our SDK message processing step, then we need to do a new entity reference, the overloaded constructor again. So the logical name is plugin type, and our GUID, we can do a get plugin ID. Need to pass it our service context. So pass it our organization service and our plugin name that we're going to search for. Oh, sorry, yeah, I shouldn't have hard coded that down here. I should have. Oops. So yeah, that's what we're going to pass in to our method, and obviously this has a parameter called plugin name. So I need to. Okay, so that's the event handler. So now we need to do our SDK message name, or message ID, sorry. So message ID. So that's an entity reference. So we're going to need to do another function to get the message ID. Do a query against the SDK message entity. So internal GUID get message ID. So take our organization service by reference and string message name. So then similar again, I can probably copy a chunk of this, or most of it. So the difference is it's the SDK message entity. We'll return all columns again. And then we want the name to be the message name we pass in. and then we'll just take the first GUID again and return it. Otherwise, return a GUID.empty. So this is a new entity reference, SDK message entity, and then get message ID, pass in our service, organization service reference, and our message is create message. So the final property is the SDK message filter ID. So that's the unique identifier of the SDK message filter, which is filtered by the entity name. So again, we're going to need another function, method even, to retrieve the GUID. If you look, this is an entity reference where I need to pass in the GUID of the, and then it's obviously the SDK message filter entity. So we're going to need to query. So get message filter ID, organization service passed in again, and the entity name for which we're, and obviously the ID as well. Sorry, for the entity and the message ID. So we need the entity name, sorry. So we don't need to actually pass that in. We can do that. We can just call the method. So it's a query expression again. It'll have two properties this time. So we've got different, it's SDK message filter. And then we're going to be querying a couple of fields. So that's SDK message ID, and that's going to be get message ID for our create message. Missing a get message ID. I think that's, yep. And then another condition, which is for our entity name. So primary object type code, and then we'll just take the entity name that we've passed in. That'll be our entity from the record that we've just created. So up here, when we call that, so we need to do a new entity reference, SDK message filter, and then the entity name, or rather the GUID. We need to call our get message filter ID, pass it our organization service, and our entity name is going to come from our target entity name property, or entity name property. So that will be our entity and then we can cast that. Oops, wrong bracket. So hopefully that makes sense, that this get message filter ID, we need to pass it the name of the entity that we wish to retrieve the messages for, and that will be so we've just created an auto number record, say, I don't know, for argument's sake, contact, to target a contact reference. Well, that's this record that's just been created, this entity late band type up here, and we need to extract the entity name as the target, pass that into this query to get the correct message filter ID. So now we should be able to just call a create of this SDK message processing step, which is just inherited from entity. It's just an extension of, it's just another entity type, but using this helper class. To a go slow. So we can see it's just a partial class that's inherited from entity. So we can just treat it like any other entity. So I can do a service.create now and pass it in our new step. We'll deploy this and then we'll come back and have a look at the delete method. What we'll also need to do is a bit of extra logic that we don't just blindly create these. In theory, if everything's going according to plan, the delete should clean up any, but obviously if there's any addition, we can't register the same step on the same entity for the same message type, or shouldn't. So we should really check that plugin hasn't already been registered against that entity on that message type of the create. So if we build this now, that build succeeded, and then I deploy. Take a little bit longer because obviously it's got to compile, and that's about a 6 meg helper class, I believe. So obviously I had the register file open, so it's just telling me my auto registration step on the create of an auto number record has been registered. So now if I go across to CRM, what I'll do as well, I'll open the plugin registration tool. So let me just do that. Sorry, I'm Windows off the screen. So if I connect to open this, just bring that into the window. So create new connection. It's an on-premise deployment. It's my CRM 2015. Just get rid of all of this. So I'm connecting to my local VM. It's not secured and so on. Display a list of organizations. Connect to my demo organization. So now I can see my plugin. I can see my auto step registration and my auto number. And these are the steps that are currently registered for my auto number plugin. So this one's currently on the one we did yesterday by hand as part of the developer toolkit, was registering against the account. So if I minimize that now, and I'll create a new against, say, the contact. What I might need to do is just check there's actually a suitable reference field. So I can create, let me just create a new reference field for the contact entity. I think there's one already in the system. No, so I'll just do a new field. No, I won't. I'll do it through my solution because otherwise it's going to have the incorrect prefix. So open my CRM developer solution, you open yours. I need to add an existing entity in, so add the contact in. Say no to any required components, otherwise it's just going to fill it with a load of bloat. Under the contact, I can do a new field, just call it contact reference or something, which is a single line of text, which is where our auto number reference is going to go. So that's SDG_contact reference will be the name of the field. Just pop this on the form as well. I'm not sure what my default. Let me just check what my default form was. I can't remember now. I didn't really look. So it's my new form layout, so I can just edit it from here, to be honest. Contact reference, so I'll just stick it under job title for now. Publish that. Okay, so back to my auto number entity. I can create a new against the contact, and that STG. This is logical name again. STG underscore contact reference. We'll start it at 0. Suffix is 2015, or maybe even we'll put a suffix with the. Well, no, we'll do that for now. Padding length, we'll just do 6. Now, when I save, this should trigger my new plugin. That's now saved, and that should have now registered. So if I bring my plugin registration tool back up and refresh, we've now got our additional step, which has been registered by our code for our secondary plugin. So it's registered on a create, contact entity, pre-operation, synchronous, on the server deployment, execution order 1. And now if we go and test that, so if I create a new contact, I'm not sure if I'm already in or not. Done. Save. Oh, yep, I already am. Cancel that. Let's change the name. So we can see that our auto-registered plugin had created the necessary plugin registration step for our contact to register our auto number plugin against the create of a contact. Let's dive back over to the code. So probably what I could do as well here is where it says create of entity, we could replace entity with this property down here. So we could, so we actually, each one's more descriptive. Plus, so when it registers the step, it would actually have the name of the entity it's being registered for. So we need to now embellish this a little bit and check for the presence of a step already. Because if I were to go and create another contact row in my auto number, if I just deploy this again, that's deployed. So if I were to go to my auto number settings again, and create another one against the contact, say the description field, it's next year's, and we'll do this padded 7. That will register or attempt to register. So it has registered. If I go back to my plugin registration tool and refresh, oh, so it's all right. Don't worry, we can live with it then. So it's done a create of contact, and it's replaced the step. So not ideal. We probably should check before we go and do it, but it doesn't appear to cause an issue, and it's actually given it the new name, and has replaced that existing step. So I was worrying over nothing. So now we need to look at the delete process to go and retrieve the plugin step and delete it from CRM, so it deregisters when a record is deleted. So in this block here, so to do our delete, it's fairly straightforward. We just need to query the SDK message processing query for the SDK message processing step that matches we can probably do it by name, to be honest, because that's going to be pretty unique. So we just need to do a query expression. What I'll copy one of the ones from below because it's a little bit quicker. So it's fairly straightforward. Query expression, get the results here. Actually, we'll do the whole. We're not going to do a return as such, but we can edit that now. So the entity is SDK message processing step. And we're going to get all columns again. Shouldn't really, but again, doesn't really matter. And then the name is going to be the step name. So if we're deleting, what we'll need to do though is add, firstly, an additional up here under our plugin assembly. We need to add an additional step on our auto step registration plugin. So we've got the create step. Now we need to register a step for the deletion. So primary entity is our auto step. I need to refresh it, sorry. Refresh that. If we look at that existing step, what we did, it was register our auto number against our auto number on a create. So we need to do it for the delete now. So add a step, bring my window up. So when an auto number record is deleted, we'll do it post operation. So, well, we can leave that description for now. But what we will need is probably do a pre-image. Just call it pre-image. And the parameters, because we'll need certain elements of this, such as the entity name, the field name, mainly really the entity name, because we need to just know what the name of the step was to delete. So when we search with our query, we'll know what the name of the step name is, which we can build from our entity name. So that should, we'll just do that. I don't really need field name, to be honest. So entity name is the only thing in the pre-image, because obviously this is a post-operation delete, so it will have been physically deleted from the database. So we'll need to obviously take the pre-image values. So that's now registered, which will have created an additional entry in here with the pre-image details. So let me just remove these return blocks. So then what we'll need to do is, obviously what we're searching for is this name up here. So it's the create of, obviously we need to substitute in the entity name, but we won't have that in the delete message. We'll have to get it from the pre-entity image. And also we may have to check up here, because the delete may only contain, the target may actually be entity reference, and so this return may actually cause it to exit for this point. So I may have to remove that. But we'll do the code, we'll deploy it, we'll test it. I mean, I haven't done this process for automatic plugin registration for a couple of years, so I'm a little bit rusty, unfortunately, so I apologize for that. But yeah, we'll deploy it, test it, and then correct if necessary if it doesn't step into the code, if it terminates up here. So yeah. So what we need to do is extract the pre-entity image equals null. context dot pre entity image contains pre-image. We don't need to do a test for the type because this pre-entity image is a entity image collection, so they have to be entities that are contained within. So if it contains one called pre-image, we can set our pre-entity image to equal and cast that pre-image called pre-image into our pre-entity image type, and then we can extract from there. Instead of this, obviously we're not going to do message name, we're looking for the name of the step to equal this, but obviously the set of entity here, it should be pre-entity image. So our pre-entity image will contain this STG entity name, so we can extract that, and this is the record we're looking for. If there are any results, then we can iterate over them, deleting them. There should only be a single result, but for each we can just do a service.delete because it's just a standard entity type. So what we need to do now is deploy it. Oops, sorry, what's that complaining about? Delete. Sorry, doesn't take an entity type. SDK message processing step, and the GUID is e.id. Yep. So now we need to deploy this and possibly test if it actually. I might have to do a attach to it and see if it hits this portion of it. Got a feeling it's the type passed in for a delete will be an entity reference because it's just a reference to the GUID of what and the entity type name that was just deleted. So that's deployed. I'll put a breakpoint here and I'll attach to my sandbox process because that's where my plugin's registered, is sandbox. Connect to my VM. Attach to the two sandbox worker processes, and then bring my CRM up. Go to my auto number records and delete one of these, which should then cause it to hit my breakpoint in Visual Studio. No, it didn't. Let me just rebuild and redeploy. Sometimes if it doesn't hit the breakpoints, I need to do a rebuild, redeploy. So debug. Unfortunately, I've just deleted that record now, so I may have to create another one. Well, I'll delete the other contact one. I can easily recreate them. So I think if we look in the plugin registration tool, and refresh, the step will still be there because it wouldn't have hit that section. I know it does. No, it appears to have worked. Looks as though, sorry, it does pass in the target with deletion is an entity type. Let's just try it again by recreating. What we hadn't done there, though, is also tested to see if there's another message processing step. If there's an existing auto number for the same entity type, because if there's still an existing, so we had two contact auto number records. If we delete one of those, we still shouldn't delete the step unless it's the last of the auto number steps against that entity. So let me just recreate, bring up. So got that one contact, but obviously there's no longer a step for this. So if I create a new contact description, So that should now have registered a new step. So it's registered a new step. I can detach from that now because we do know it's actually working. But before I do this query expression of the message processing steps, I should check if there are any other auto number steps. So I'll query, copy any of these, because it's post delete as well. We know we've any remaining. If there's one for the same entity, we know. So my auto number entity, where the entity name, so you might need to do it after we've done the pre-entity image. Sorry, this is a little bit messy. So we'll have access to the entity name that's being deleted. So here, where we're looking for the entity name, we can take this as the value we're searching for. So basically search the auto number entity. Just make a bit of space to make it clearer. So we've got the pre-entity image on the delete, which will contain the entity that's been deleted. Go and query the auto number entity for any others for the same entity name. And obviously if there are any results, so if call it auto, I don't know what auto bumper is, I meant to say auto number results equals results of this query. Let's call it query auto number as well, because we're going to get it griping underneath. So query the auto number entity where the entity name equals the same as the one we've just deleted. If there's any results, then we'll just exit. And then otherwise do the other block of code. So if there aren't any results, and let's just clean that up a bit. So if there aren't any others for that same entity, then it will delete the message processing step. So let's just do a build, rebuild, deploy. So I'll just prove this. I've got, refresh that. I've got two. Oh no, we deleted it, sorry. Yeah. Okay, so that's deployed. So what I'll do is delete both of these. Well, I'll delete this description one, recreate it. So entity name contact, description, and a counter of 0. We won't worry about the prefixes and stuff. So that should have created a message processing step, which it has. We've got a contact, a creative contact. Now, in our code, obviously, we've said if there's more than one of, so after we delete one, so in here, once I delete either one of these, it should check and see that there's another contact record and not delete the step. That's the theory anyway. So refresh that. So you see it's left the message processing step now. If I go back to CRM and I delete the final contact, then go back to my plugin registration tool, and it's left that as well. Not sure it is actually hitting that step properly. I'll just pop this on pause. I'll do a quick test of what's going on. Hi, sorry about that. Yeah, I've found there's a couple of issues. It's creating more than one step. So if I create a contact line and then create another contact line, I'm actually getting 2 steps. So we need to add a check-in on the auto number to see if there's already a step with that name before trying to add another one. Also, it wasn't deleting at all. I think actually what was happening was the asynchronous service was actually deleting the steps weirdly. I had a quick nose around online and I found this async auto delete false, which I thought was to do with asynchronous processes only, but it seems that the asynchronous process seemed to be actually harvesting the steps and deleting them. So this should be cleaned up again now. So that's clear of any steps. What I had to do as well, it wasn't hitting the delete step because, as I suspected, it is actually an entity reference. So it was misleading. I thought the plugin registration, it was hitting the delete area, but it's actually just cleaning up. So I've added this extra check that if the target, so if it's not an entity, but it is target of entity reference and it contains a pre-image, a pre-entity image called pre-image, and the message name is delete, then it will set the pre-entity image up here, and I've added the extra reference earlier on. Otherwise, if neither of those are true, it will return. Also, it wasn't hitting the step as well because of I hadn't put the extra registered event in, so it didn't have this extra line here. This needed to be added. It was only working for a create, because obviously that filters out what events it can run against, what message names. So done all those things. Tidied up the delete, obviously, because it doesn't need the pre-entity image bit declaring down here. So now it appears to be working, but obviously I do need to do a check on this auto number if the entity name equals. So if none of these exist, so basically before we actually create a new one, we need to do a check to see on the entity name equals, and this will be back to so if we're going to create another contact auto number row, if there already is one, we don't want it to go and create more SDK message processing steps. So this will basically query that auto number to see if there's already one called with that name of if it's already got one for that entity, and if so, actually we need to query the message processing step. Sorry, copy that instead. Sorry about that. So query the message processing steps already to see if there's already one for the current entity, and if there is, query. So if there already is one, so basically if there's no results, then do this creation of the message processing step. So query the SDK message processing steps for one called create of the name of the entity we've just added the row for. If there aren't any results, then add a new one. Otherwise, it will just carry on and fall out of scope of the plugin. So hopefully between all those things now, got a little bit messy then. Let's just redeploy. So that's deployed. So we've got no ones for contact at the moment. If I show you the plugin registration tool, refresh it, we have no steps against the auto number plugin for that. Now if I add a new contact reference, I'll just put in that for now, save and close, that should trigger our plugin. If I refresh, now I've got create of contact. If I create another contact auto number with a description or something, so again, that should have fired, but check to see if they're ready. So this is the moment of truth. Has it prevented? So it hasn't created an additional step. Now, when we go to delete them, if I delete description, it should check to see if there's still another active auto number with the same entity name and not delete the step. So this step should be retained. Create of contact. So if I delete that description one, should have fired the plugin check to see if there's any other auto number, and then I refresh, we've still got the step. And if I delete the final contact row and bring up and refresh, it should have deleted that message processing step, which it has done. So that's finally working as intended. So yeah, I think that completes it. Obviously, really it could do with some logic to verify things like these, that's a valid entity name and field name. We possibly could write some code to dynamically populate option sets for these based on the metadata. So yeah, at the moment it could probably crash if we put names in that were incorrect for the auto number itself, that is, and if you put an incorrect entity name for the plugin that registers the auto number, it could probably crash because it will throw an exception because it won't have a valid entity name. So if I went to here and put something like that, which isn't a valid entity name, it will throw an exception, no doubt. Yeah, so it doesn't. There's no such entity as that, so it's failed. So there needs to be some proper error handling, but obviously, as I say, this is just for demonstration purposes. But I'll post the source code up, a link to a zip file containing it. But hopefully that helps a few of you if you need to do this kind of auto plugin registration steps. The hardest part is obviously finding any documentation around this SDK message processing step class. And obviously I wouldn't have realized that would have scavenged the database, the registration steps if it wasn't set. So but thank you for watching, and if you've got any questions or comments, feel free to post them below. Thanks. Bye.